Hey there, namaste and welcome. My name is Elena and Happy New Year 2022. Let's just hope that this new year brings good times for every one of us, unlike the previous ones. So, today's true crime story is about Elizabeth Short, whose lifespan of just 22 years ended in the most horrific way. She would have lived her life fully and done something good with it, but it was abruptly cut short just because some monster thought otherwise. It's a real sad story, so without further ado, let's dive right in. On the morning of January 15, 1947, at around 10 a.m., a local resident of Los Angeles, Betty Bersinger, while walking south on the west side of Norton Avenue in Leimert Park with her 3-year-old daughter Anne, en route to a shoe repair shop, came across what appeared to be a discarded store mannequin in the woods 50 feet north of a fire hydrant and about a foot in from the sidewalk. But a rather close observation led them to the discovery of a mutilated body of a 22-year-old Elizabeth Short. Betty then telephoned the police from a nearby house, let them know about it, and then went about her day. Pretty strong lady. Aggie Underwood of the Herald Express, Sid Hughes of the LA Examiner, and Marvin Miles of the LA Times were among the first reporters to arrive the scene along with the photographers of those papers. Crowd was setting in, detectives, locals, police. It was a horrifyingly shocking sight, and they were all perplexed to say the least. The killer had performed hemicorporectomy, meaning the body was completely cut in half post-mortem, but the cut was so clean that not a single internal organ was touched, which suggested that someone with surgical skills must have committed the crime. The body was completely drained of blood, leaving it so white that not a single drop of blood was found on the scene, other than the watery droplets found on the cement sack that was found nearby, which was probably used to move the body parts there. Also, a heel print was found on the ground amid the tire tracks. Body was scrubbed with brush and cleaned with gasoline, leaving no fingerprints behind. Intestines were neatly tucked beneath it, and the corpse was lying face up, oddly posed, with her eyes open, hands over her head, and legs spread apart. There were laceration marks on different parts of her body, and her cheeks were slashed from corners of her mouth to her ears, giving her a ever-present, haunting Joker smile while she was still alive. The blood loss from those wounds and cerebral hemorrhage was what actually killed her. The gory details of such gruesome nature of crime was what made it the most infamous cold case ever. After the grim discovery of the body, nobody that knew her came to claim it, not her own father. Her mother didn't know about it yet, so she was just another unidentified Jane Doe until her fingerprints were run on the database by the LAPD, and the results came soon after, as Elizabeth Short had been arrested previously due to underage drinking. They had her mugshot, and soon enough she was dubbed the Black Dahlia by the media and her admirers because of her custom of wearing sheer black clothing, her dark hair, and the movie Blue Dahlia that came out around that time. So who was the victim? Phoebe May Sawyer birthed a baby girl named Elizabeth Short on July 29, 1924 in Hyde Park section of Boston, Massachusetts. Short's father Cleo used to build miniature golf courses until he lost most of his savings in 1929 stock market crash and abandoned her when she was just 5 years old, although they would reconcile for a while later on, as Short was troubled by bronchitis and severe asthma attack. Since her early years, she underwent lung surgery at the age of 15, so she didn't smoke, neither was she an alcoholic, and other circulated infos about her being a prostitute, lesbian with infantile genitalia are all a hoax. Moving on, after 14 years, when Phoebe, her mother, received a letter of apology from her presumed deceased husband, Short, at the age of 18, relocated to Vallejo, California, to live with her father in the year 1943 in LA, but she just lived there for a few weeks before she left for Camp Cook near Lompoc, briefly living with a U.S. Army Air Force sergeant who reportedly abused her. So she left Lompoc in mid-1943 and moved to Santa Barbara, where she was arrested for drinking at a local bar while underage. On September 23, 1943, Short then returned to Florida, where she met Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., a decorated Army Air Force. They fell in love and they were planning to marry, but Gordon died in a second crash on August 10, 1945, less than a week before the end of the war. That's sad. And it's really crazy to think how one contingent event triggers another big ones in our lives. Everything's connected indeed. So on July 1946, Short relocated to Los Angeles. She made a few acquaintances here and there. She worked as a waitress and she lived and rented a room behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. And as some sources go, she did in fact have aspirations to be a film star, although she had no prior acting jobs or credits. And then came the cursed year for Elizabeth Short. On January 9, 1947, Robert Reid Manley, a married 25-year-old salesman and former army musician, whom she was dating at the time, dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA at around 6:30 p.m. It is said that Manley was the last person to see Elizabeth Short alive, but by some accounts, staff of the Biltmore Hotel recalled having seen her using the lobby telephone shortly after, and she was allegedly seen by the patrons of the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge at 754 South Olive Street, approximately 600 meters away from the Biltmore. Even so, Manley was suspected in her murder and was hounded for the rest of his life, but he passed the polygraph test and had solid alibi at the time of killing, so he was set free. But interestingly enough, he was committed to a mental hospital in 1954 and later died on January 9, 1986. The day he last saw Elizabeth Short was on January 9, only 39 years earlier. So the investigation went on, and a reporter from one of the newspapers called Phoebe, Elizabeth Short's mother, in order to get extra infos about her daughter. He claimed that she had won a beauty contest. That's harsh. But later she was notified of her daughter's murder. How she must have felt, can't imagine. At first she didn't even believe it until the police arrived to convey the news in person. After a week, the killer mailed an envelope of items from Elizabeth's purse to the LA Examiner. All those items were cleaned of fingerprints by using gasoline, like with body. The letter was addressed with letters cut out of a newspaper. It said, Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers, here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow. And as it said, it contains Short's birth certificate, social security number, an address book, and mind you, that old address book was missing some of its pages. Perhaps it had killer's name on it. Original investigators believed that only this first letter was authentic. The rest, and there were many of them, some handwritten, some typed out, that were mostly signed Black Dahlia Avenger, were all considered pranks. A relatively common practice in the 1940s. Anyways, detectives interview lots of people, as police considered everyone who knew Elizabeth Short as potential suspects who had to be eliminated. Men and women, and all confessing to the murder, seeking fame, were questioned and cleared. So were hundreds of medical school students from University of Southern California, although it was said that the radical procedure performed on Short's body was not taught in medical school in the 1930s. Still gotta be sure, I suppose. So all that transpired, and although the vast majority of suspects were considered to be male, authorities did not rule out the possibility of a female killer. One theory held that the assailant bisected Short's body because he or she was not strong enough to move it in one piece. And one of the first people to confess to murder was, in fact, a female who was a Women's Army Corps WAC sergeant stationed in San Diego. Authorities took the confession so seriously that they investigated it thoroughly but found it to be groundless. Another suspect was simply referred to as Queer Woman Surgeon on the district attorney's files on the case. Other celebrity suspects included the folk singer Woody, filmmaker Orson Welles, also gangster Benjamin Siegel, along with Norman Chandler, because the theory of involvement of multiple perpetrators was put forth as well. Other credible suspects came into the picture. By then, to name a few, one was Dr. Patrick O'Reilly, who was a medical doctor and a sadist. Another on the suspect list was Leslie Dillon, a 27-year-old bellhop, aspiring writer, and former mortician's assistant, who became a suspect when he began writing to a LAPD psychiatrist, Dr. J. Paul de River, in October 1948. So in 1949, self-styled police psychiatrist Dr. De River conducted a rogue investigation of the Black Dahlia murder using members of the gangster squad, bypassing the lead detectives and the homicide division. But Dr. River's suspect Leslie Dillon was in San Francisco when Elizabeth Short was murdered. Also, there was no connection between Leslie and Elizabeth. Neither was he connected to nightclub executive Mark Hanson. Plus, he didn't have any medical education, so the police cleared him out after an exhaustive investigation. Which brings us to the another suspect, Mark Hanson. He too had no connection to whatever minimal organized crime might have existed in Los Angeles at that time. But remember the address book that were sent by someone claiming to be a killer? The address book that was sent actually belonged to Mark Hanson. But since Elizabeth Short used to live with Mark Hanson's then girlfriend and Dorothy at the Mark Hanson's home, she simply used the address book as her own. District Attorney's files indicate that Hanson tried seducing Short but was rebuffed. Since he never had any criminal record, nor he had known history of violence or any evidence for him in this case, so no charges were ever brought against him, and he died of natural causes in 1964. The Astor Motel on South Flower Street was thoroughly examined by police, the place where Short was supposedly murdered, but nothing was found to indicate she was killed there or had ever been there. Other controversial suspect was Dr. George Hodell, courtesy of his son Steve Hodell, who himself was a detective. You might have heard their name as well if you're familiar with Short's case. So I'm gonna go directly to what led to this. After the death of George Hodell, the father, his wife Lucy, handed a small album to the son, Steve Hodell, and he thought nothing of it, but while he was randomly going through the album, he discovered the photographs of two women whom he thought resembled Elizabeth Short. And then began the whole story of him blaming his own father for the murder of Elizabeth Short. Those photographs and also the handwritten notes that were sent by the killer previously, Steve Hodell thought that the handwriting matched with that of his own father's handwriting, but the forensic analyst thought otherwise. Many false news, many rumors regarding this case has gone around, circulate. Like one of the news that went around was that a mysterious black car, very similar to 1936 Packard owned by Dr. George Hodell, was seen around the spot where Elizabeth's body was later on found. But it is said that Dr. George Hodell had no connection to Elizabeth Short. He was never a prime suspect in the Black Dahlia case. In fact, he was put under surveillance in the year 1950 from February 18 to March 27 for around 40 days, but nothing serious came out of it, so he was eliminated. Dr. Hodell was never suspected of killing his secretary as well, who committed suicide with an overdose of sleeping pills in 1945, nor was he suspected of killing Jane French in 1947, nor Louis Springer in 1949. Dr. George Hodell had minimal surgical training, just enough to graduate from medical school. Many accounts say that Dr. George Hodell was specialized in public health, particularly STDs. His clients were poor blacks living in Little Tokyo, renamed Bronzeville during World War II, not the wealthy elite of Los Angeles. Although in 1949, his own daughter Tamar Hodell accused Dr. George Hodell and 19 boys at Hollywood High School of having sex with her, it's said that Dr. George Hodell was neither rich nor influential, so he took out a loan on his house to cover his legal expenses when accused of molesting his own daughter Tamar. Also, a jury of 8 women and 4 men found Dr. George Hodell not guilty of molesting. Numerous witnesses, including Tamar's mother and grandmother, said that Tamar had been a pathological liar for many years and prone to making up fictional stories about sex. All of them said that they would not believe her, even under oath. After George Hodell's home was bugged for 40 days and nothing came out of it, he left for Philip as no incriminating evidence was found, but it is said that Dr. George Hodell did not flee to escape prosecution in the Black Dahlia case. He flew because his reputation was so ruined after being accused of molesting his own daughter, even though he was found not guilty, that he had to go to Hawaii to find a job, and that the LAPD could have extradited him to Los Angeles if it wanted to. So Dr. George Hodell left United States in 1950, just days after the district attorney stopped investigating him, and returned only 40 years later when the search for the killer had long gone cold. He then died in 1991 at the age of 91. Another promising suspect was Bailey, because he lived just a few blocks. He used to live with his estranged wife just a few blocks away from where the body was found. And he had attended Elizabeth Short's sister's wedding. How could he not know who Elizabeth Short was? When Bailey died in January 1948, his autopsy showed that he was suffering from a degenerative brain disease, and one writer theorizes that Bailey's neurological deterioration was what contributed to his alleged violence against Short. So the murderer is long dead, but whoever did this, let's just hope that they are rotting in hell. But to this day, the case remains open and unsolved. So that's it for today. Please consider subscribing if you liked the video. Don't forget to hit the bell icon, like the video, share it if you can, and I'll see you in my next video. Until then, take care. Bye.